The title of our talk is Creating and Managing Research Databases in Microsoft Access. And our goal today is to provide you with a basic introduction to using Microsoft Access. Those of you who already are experienced with using Access may find that this lecture is essentially a review of what you know. Instead, this lecture is designed to address those who may have a very limited knowledge of Access. Thus, we hope that this lecture will provide you with a basic or overall understanding of the fundamental steps for building your own database and using this database in a way that you'll be able to address multiple needs and that you can expand on what we address today on your own. So, our objectives today are outlined here, and I'll be co-presenting this lecture with Chen. Jack and I have been using Access together for the past 3 years as a part of our research. And we've structured this lecture, as Dr. Cruciani mentioned, in 2 parts. I will present the first part, and Jack will present the second part. My part will be very brief. Jack's is a lot more interesting, and I think you'll see that he gives you a very hands-on, applied view of how to build an Access database and use it to meet your specific needs. I'm going to begin by providing an overview of Microsoft Access. What is it and why do we use it? Next, I'll review the elements of database planning. This is important. Before you design a database, it's important to plan what your database will do and how it will function and how you will use it to achieve your aims. Then I'm going to hand the lecture off to Jack, who is going to demonstrate the fundamentals of database design. He's custom-made a tutorial that he will lead you through so that you can actually see the steps that are involved in creating and managing a database. Finally, we'll leave some time for group discussion. However, if you have a question at any point during this presentation, we welcome you to ask it. So if we take a step back and ask a very fundamental question and begin by asking, what are databases? The simplest and broadest definition is that they are structures for collecting data. We use databases often in our daily life. In the past, data processing and retrieval was highly technical and somewhat complex. Nowadays, databases are ubiquitous, and we might be using them daily and not even be aware of it. For example, most websites are databases. Those of you who read a newspaper every day online are actually utilizing a database. Your user account is stored in a database with other user accounts. The article that you're reading is stored in a database with other articles. And your credit card information, for better or for worse, is stored in a database with other credit card numbers. So, however, it's important to note that just because you compile or collect data and store it in a specific place, this does not make it a database. The data has to be managed to some level of rigor or quality. And by that I mean it needs to have a certain degree of accuracy, availability, and usability. This is where database management software comes into play. So some examples of different database software programs are Microsoft Access, Oracle, which many of you may be familiar with, we use it here at the hospital, as well as MySQL, which is a structured query language that's often used by programmers. So what is Access? Access is a relational database management system, or DBMS. A relational database is a database in which the data are stored in tables and related to data in other tables. Jack will talk more about these tables later. Access is a software for collecting, sorting, and reporting your data. It was first released in 1992 as part of Microsoft's suite of Office applications. You all have this on your desktop at Beth Israel. And Microsoft Access 2010 is the latest version. So this slide shows at the bottom of the figure here a timeline for the different iterations of Access that have been released with every new iteration of Microsoft Office. So We showed this particular screenshot to give you a sense of what Microsoft Access looks like. And you can see, notice that this table looks very similar to a spreadsheet, such as Excel. While this screenshot shows you version 2010, here at Beth Israel we use version 2003. So we'll be showing you how to create a database in version 2003. For those of you who may have a newer version on a home computer and want to try building your own database, Access will essentially work the same way, but the specific features of the user interface may be slightly different, such as the menu locations. So you can apply what you learn here in version 2003 and use it with a newer version of Access. So what is the rationale for using Access? Why do we want to use this specific database management system? Well, we tried to distill a few of the reasons here. And if you have others, we'd really like to hear them. One reason is usability. It's relatively easy to use Access and develop a basic proficiency in utilizing it. It simplifies the management of large amounts of data and overcomes many of the limitations of managing large amounts of information. So we're going to illustrate why this is so later in this presentation. And this simplification of managing large amounts of data relates to the next point, which is, while a spreadsheet like Excel is very useful for calculations, Access databases allow you to easily filter, sort, and update your data on a regular basis. For example, you can easily filter out participants in a specific data set for a study who are smokers, live in New York City, and have a pain severity score of 4 or greater out of 10. In our experience, you could do this in Excel and retrieve all of the patients who meet those criteria, but it's a bit more cumbersome, particularly if you don't have a high level of proficiency in it, than Access. You can also manipulate and sort your data in terms of what you want to depict in your database. It's a highly visual modality for viewing your data. And in the real world, we're constantly updating our data. And you frequently need to produce reports in real time based on the data you've collected. In Access, there is a reports and queries function that is dynamic as your data. So for example, you can set a series of commands, save them, and these are known as a filter. And for example, if you wanted to retrieve the number of patients who are smokers, live in New York City, and have pain severity of greater than 4 out of 10, at any time point in your study, you can simply run that query and your data will be retrieved for all of the patients who meet that criteria. Very simple thing to do. You can constantly generate reports in real time based on new data. Another important aspect relates to quality assurance. In our experience, using Access helps you reduce errors and inconsistencies in your data entry. And this is very, very important for maintaining the quality of your data and the rigor of your data. In addition, a feature that we really like involves efficiency. Access allows you to have simultaneous entry into the database by multiple users. How many times have we been concerned about entering data and then passing off the file to another person and having them upload more data and worrying that changes aren't going to be reflected, and you're waiting for them to return it to you so that you can continue to work in it, and that introduces a delay. This feature allows multiple users to be working in the same database, adding new information, adding new data, and then in order for you to be able to see that, it's not going to appear on the screen. You need to close out of the program after saving it and reopen it, and there you'll see the data that's been entered by any number of users. So this is a really nice feature that can make you more efficient and productive. So let's take some of this information and apply it to a hypothetical study called Pain in Cancer Patients. So an important first step before we begin building our database is to plan our database. It's critical to know your data, really get familiar with your data, and know your project goals. So let's take our hypothetical study on cancer pain. Let's say our primary goal is to identify the number of patients who report that their pain intensity, their worst pain intensity, in the past week was greater than a 4 out of 10. So what information should we include in our database to fulfill our aims and our analytic plan? Well, on the side of the slide here, you see a copy of the Brief Pain Inventory Short Form, or the BPI, which is a measurement tool or questionnaire that assesses pain intensity and other pain characteristics. So it would be important to include responses from the BPI on this questionnaire into our database. Very, very fundamental, basic step. Now I want you to imagine you've screened 500 patients with the BPI, and you've entered this data into Excel. So here's a screenshot of Excel. This screenshot only shows data from about 100 patients, but what if you had 500 or 1,000? I don't know about you, but already my eyes are starting to hurt a little bit. And remember, this is data from only one questionnaire, the BPI, and each row is for a separate patient. So what if you had more questionnaires on demographics or quality of life or cancer treatment? So suppose you were asked to retrieve the number of patients who had pain severity greater than 7 out of 10, who live in New York, California, and Kentucky, and are between the ages of 18 and 35, and also have a score on the Beck Depression Inventory that's 19 or greater. Well, again, you could retrieve that information, but it might be extremely cumbersome, and in our experience, data retrieval is much easier in Access, especially when you apply those filters, as I mentioned, where you can save a set of commands that identify the criteria in your data set that you want to retrieve, save it, and rerun it as you update your database with new data. Another issue we want to emphasize is that this interface, as I mentioned, can be difficult in terms of minimizing errors in your data entry. So as I will show you, and Jack will lead you through the tutorial, an interface with Access is particularly helpful for large data sets in reducing the likelihood of errors. And you might ask, well, why is that? Well, you can establish rules for your data. Let's say that you want to restrict the range of values for worst pain from 1 to 10. And when you go to enter the data for a specific patient into your data set, you enter an 11 for worst pain. What will happen if you've established your rules is that an error box will pop up telling you that you've entered a value that is outside of your restricted range. So you can see this can be really helpful for minimizing errors with data entry. In addition, if you were to be numbering your patients consecutively from 1 to affinity, and you skip a record between 305 and 307 and skip number 306, you'll get an error message prompting you that you've skipped patient number 306. So there's some nice features here that I think you'll see make this really user-friendly and helpful in terms of quality assurance. And while we agree that Excel is great after the data has been collected for analyzing and calculating various computations, but with respect to filtering your data and data entry with regard to variables of interest, we happen to prefer Access. A spreadsheet like this can grow legs and become bigger and bigger and bigger and become unmanageable. This is only one sheet. Imagine the variables of interest that you have are on multiple sheets and you want to retrieve them in an easy way. So here's the same information in Access. So one of the things you might readily notice here is that this looks just like a form. This form is titled Brief Pain Inventory, which is the name of our questionnaire. And as you can see, the interface here is very simple. It's attractive, and it's easy to visualize your data. Second, what's different here from Excel, from the spreadsheet I showed you, is that you can focus on one patient at a time and then proceed to other questionnaires for this specific patient very easily. So over here you have a date of interview, you have a study ID, which is a unique identifier for that patient. This is the first item on the BPI. This person says, yes, I have pains other than everyday aches and pains. And you can see here you have various treatment modalities for pain. Suppose you want to enter in string or qualitative data, data that's non-numeric. Here you have a box where you can write in comments. Here you can establish numerical values for the range of pain severity items from 0 to 10, so that if you type in a 15, you'll get a little error box like this that pops up and says, sorry, you've put in a value that is not recognized and need to correct your error. And then if you want to proceed to the next questionnaire for this patient on demographics or quality of life, you can simply do that by clicking on the dialog button. So again, you can really customize this in any layout or color scheme that you like to meet your needs. Dr. Cruciani.
So how does the program recognize that 15 is not a right number? You have to program that in advance?
Correct. You would program this in advance when you're planning your database that certain items would have certain ranges for which a value falling outside that range would be recognized and notify the user that an error has been made. So at this point, I want to hand it over to Jack. This is the experiential part of our lecture. It's almost like watching a recipe being made on the Food Network. He is literally going to show you the ingredients you need to build a database, and he may even have a cake afterwards that skips through some of the steps, but we hope it'll provide you with a fundamental understanding of this. Thank you. Sure.
All right, so thank you, Dr. Dhingra, for that wonderful introduction. You know, when I first started working at BI, I didn't know anything about Microsoft Access. And now here I am, 3 years later, giving a talk on it. So as you see, like, Microsoft Access is a program, in my opinion, that is easy to learn, easy to use, and hopefully you'll see that too in my tutorial. And who knows, maybe you'll get interested enough that you'll go home, learn more about this program, and find out about other features that I didn't talk about today. So we're just going to quit out PowerPoint right now. And the first thing is we need to open up Access. So where do we find it? It is in the same menu where you locate all your Microsoft Word, PowerPoint. So we're going to go to Programs, we're going to go to Office, and we're going to go Access. So we're going to open up Access, and we want to create a new file. So we go to the icon for New, similar to Word. Click New. And right away, you'll see a couple options on the right-hand corner. You have a blank database, or you can choose from some templates that Office provides. And a lot of times, the templates are business-oriented, so I don't think they pertain to research. So we're just going to use a blank database. So it's going to click on that. And first thing you'll see, it'll ask you to save. Very important step. So we're just going to name it Demo. And I'm just going to replace the one we have here. As soon as you save, you'll get a little window, and I like to call this the database window. It is sort of like a toolbox where you can locate all your tools to create your database. On the left, you have the objects. You have your tables, where we said that we will store our data. The queries is the filter. That's where we can sort and update our data. The forms is where you're going to enter your data. And the reports is where you will print out like a document of your queries. So the first step is to create a table. We want to have a place to store all our values. So you'll see here in the window a couple options to how you can create your table. You can choose from Design View, what we are going to use today. You can also use a wizard. That's where you let the program sort of automate your table. I find it to be a little bit too much of a shortcut because you want to have a good handle, a good idea of how to create your table in case you want to make adjustments later. Next, you have create table by entering data, which I find also to be defeats the purpose of using Access because you want to use a form. So let's create table in Design View. And you'll get this window. And this is where it's kind of like the blueprint for your table. This is where you start structuring how your table is going to be. I think we're out of batteries. All right, so I'll just use the mouse. On the left-hand column, we have the field name. That is where you enter categories for your data. So it could be a study ID, something unique to identify each patient. It could be a last name, it could be a first name, or it could be the items from your surveys or questionnaires. Next, you have the data type. That's where you set what kind of data, what kind of properties the data is going to be. And if you click on it, you'll see a little pull down, and you can choose from a text, a number, a date. And I find that a lot of times it's good to set these data types because it restricts what data is going to be entered. So if you were to say this was a number, you won't be able to enter text. Next, you have a description, and that's where you can kind of write a little brief description of what that field is. So if this was a study ID, you would say this is the patient's or participant's study ID or record, because you want to keep your field names short and sweet, and you want to keep, and this is where you sort of elaborate on it. Like you can write the whole entire question from the BPI instead of writing it all here. So I'm going to show you what a finished product looks like. So let's close this out, and we're going to close this one out, and we're going to open up an existing database. So here we have our cancer pain study that I created earlier, and I'm going to open it. And usually when you open up an existing database, you'll get security warnings. It doesn't mean anything. You can safely ignore it. So we're just going to say, no, we're not going to block it. And we're going to say open. And right away, you'll see your database window again. And this time, you'll notice that there are some previous tables that I created. And this is where you'll locate all the tables that you created. You'll also see them in queries. If we have some queries made, you'll see them here too. So let's take a look at our BPI table. And when you open it, right away, you'll see all your data stored. You'll notice it looks similar to Excel. On top here is your field names. So this kind of categorizes what data you have going down. So study ID, you have from each participant going down. And this is the unique identifier for each row. So you know this is patient 1, these are the results for patient 2. You have your second BP question, then your third. So let's take a look at what's going on behind this. So we want to change the view. Anytime you want to change the view, you just click this button. And we want to see design view. Again, design view is the blueprint. That is the structure behind everything. So we take a look. And this time you'll see all the rows filled out. You have your study ID and the packet number of the patient. BP question, do you have pain? It's a yes, no. So here we have where we start getting into rating the person's pain. So before we talked about how we can set up restrictions, like ranges, for our numeric pain scale. And you can do that right here, this little section on the bottom. And you'll see a caption called validation rule. And you'll see here in this range of numbers. So that means that whenever someone enters data, they have to be within this range. And if not, you'll get incorrect value. So this is where you can start kind of play around, set rules, kind of restrict your data. And so here we have a row for each item. Yes?
Check the validated rule for the correct numbers that is on top. Doesn't it look the same as the incorrect number?
Oh, no, it says,
So what's
the,
the question?
so it's,
It says 0, 1, or 10. And
yeah.
the incorrect value is 0, 1, or 10.
So Dr. Cruciani asks that what you see here on top for the rule for the range looks the same as what you have here. Well, that's because this is the text. That's what pops up. So this is really saying that this is what you entered was an incorrect value. The value must be between this. And so you see that, you're now, oh, okay, I made a mistake, so I need to go and correct that. So now you have your table. It's all set up for you to enter data. So how do you enter that data? So we're going to close this, and we're going to go to Forms. And we want to create a new form. You can have two options. You can use Design View, or you can use a wizard. And I'll show you why we don't want to use a Design View. We're going to open this up, and you'll see that you get like a blank screen, like a blank little canvas to work with. If you were to use a Design View, you have to create your form from scratch. You have to make every single question for you to enter data in. a lot more work, and I find it to be kind of like an unnecessary step. So we're going to close this, and we're going to use the wizard, let the program make it for us. And right away, it's going to ask you which table you want to make your form for. So we go here, and we want the BPI table. Which fields do you want? We want all of them. So we're going to go next. And it's going to ask you which layout you want. You can pick different layouts. We're going to stick with the default. Click next. It's going to ask you what style do you want. Again, stay with default here. And finally, almost to the end, it's going to ask you to name your form. So the general convention for naming a form is to name it the same as your table, but indicate that it's a form by saying FRM, so it's a form, and that it's the BPI form. All right, so we're just going to click on Finish. And right away, the program makes the form for you. So you see you have a place for you to enter your study ID, choose your BPI question, choose your pain, yes, no, and enter in your values. So at this point, you can start entering data. If you want a new record, you just click on this little triangle and star, and you go to a new record, and you can start entering in patient numbers. You can click yes, and so forth and so on. But if you notice that it looks a little different than the example that we gave earlier. So there's some options you can make to make it look a little bit more attractive. And to do that, again, we go to Design View. And we're just going to ignore this. This is basically saying, again, that we did not enter data. We didn't finish entering data here. So we're just going to remove that, change the view. I'm just going to pull this out so you can see. So you can change the size of your form by clicking here and kind of pulling it out a little bit. And so what can we change here? So we can change, maybe you want the font to be a little bigger. So we're going to pull this out so you can see. Maybe you want to change the font size, the font, or the color. Or maybe you want to change what the background looks like. So you can, let me just do that again. You can right-click on the form. You're going to go to Properties. Here you can change details of your form. For the most part, you want to leave this alone. You don't want to mess around too much with it. But we can change some of the cosmetics. So we're going to go to Format, and we're going to change the back color. You can pick a different color. Anyway, press OK, and exit out. So you can see it changes the color. So let me show you a finished one that if you spend a little bit more time on, what it will look like. So we'll close this. We're not going to save any changes. And open this up. So if you spend a little more time on it, you'll see that you can change up the size. You can change the names. You can so that people would know what does BPI stand for, 1, 2. You'll notice that it asks all these names. That means that this form is not connected to a table. So that means that when you enter data in, it's not going to be saved anywhere. So that's what that means. All right, so we can just close out here. So now you have a way to enter your data and a way to store your data. So let's say we made a mistake and we forgot a question. And we wanted to go back and we wanted to add in the worst pain, the current pain item. So let's go to tables again. And we want to see the design view. So you see here that we have worst, we have least, we have average pain, but we don't have the question for current pain. So we're just going to add in that question. We want the number. And you can start setting in the restrictions here. But I'm going to skip that step. And we're just going to, for brevity, we're just going to say current pain. Okay, and then we're just going to say save. And we're going to change the view again back to data sheet or the table view. And you'll see that you have a new column ready to enter data. So how do we enter that data? We use the form. So we click X and we go Forms. And we open up our form. And right away you'll notice a problem. How are we going to enter in that question? The form was automated, so it made these fields based upon your previous table. So how do we add in a new section? Well, we can go to Design. We can And you'll see here on the left sort of a toolbox letting you choose different things to add to your form. And we want to add a text box. So let me just open up some more so we have some space. And we're just going to pick text box, and we're going to drag it out. And right away, you have made a space for you to enter data. Right now, it says unbound. That means there's nowhere to store it. Where is this data going to go? So to let it know where the data is going to be stored, we right-click it, our properties, and we want data. So it says control source. That is where you tell it where is the data going to be stored. So you can pick the drop-down, and right away you'll see our new question, BP5. And we're just going to close. And you can also change the text, so you can write down BP5. And we save, change the view. So now you have a new place for you to enter data. You'll notice that these have drop-downs, and for this case, I didn't use a drop-down. You want to see, I'll show you what a drop-down looks like. It's called a combo box, and so you can make different different options here. You can use a combo box, and you can write the values that you want. So we're just going to we're going to skip this step, but generally, you can choose what kind of tool that you want to use, whether you want to use a text box, a combo box. This is a checkbox. Okay, so we're just going to close this, and we'll save. And now you have a place to enter data. You have a place to store your data. So now you want to know about your data. So like Dr. Dhingra said earlier, you want to find out about patients who were interviewed and had pain greater than 4. So to do that, we go to queries. And again, I find it to be easier to use a design view so you can kind of know the workings of it. So we click on it. And it's going to ask you to choose the tables that you want to query. Where do you want, what tables do you want to filter your data from? So we want to know our BPI, and we want to know our interviews. So we're going to close this. So what fields do we want to show? We want to know study ID. We need to know who those patients are. So we click on it, and we drag, and we drop. And then we want who was interviewed. So we click on that, drag, and you drop. And we want to know what their pain was, what the worst pain was. So that was question 2. So we drag and drop again. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So we're going to save, and we're just going to leave it as it is, query for now, but you can save it whatever you want. Press OK. We're going to go query, and we're going to run. And you'll see here you have a list of all the patients with study ID, whether or not they've been interviewed, and what their pain score was for worst pain. But you can see that easily on a table. What we want to know is who was interviewed. So let's go back, and this time we want to know who was interviewed. So you'll see here the caption, criteria. So we want to say this equals yes. So all the patients who choose yes, they were interviewed. So we're going to save, and we're going to run again. And this time you'll see that it limits the data to only the patients who were interviewed. So let's say we this time, instead of those who were interviewed, those who had pain greater than 4. So we're going to go back, and we're going to remove this, and we're going to change this to 4 or greater, so we're just going to say greater than 3. Save. Again, we're going to run the query, and this time it only shows us patients who has 4 or greater. And you notice right away there was a mistake done that this person had a worst pain greater than 4, but he wasn't interviewed. So you can change the criteria around, and a lot of times you will notice, so you can get a better idea of your data, and you may be able to pick up some mistakes or some trends in your data this way. So the next step is you want to present this to your PI or your colleagues and say, hey, what happened to this person? We didn't interview him. So we close this, and we go to reports. And this time we want to use the wizard. If you like the form, when you go in design view, you have to create it from scratch. So we're going to close this, and we're going to do by wizard, have the program make it for us. And we choose what tables or queries you want to make. So we're going to choose the query that we just did. I'm going to choose all of them. And click Next. You can choose how you want to group the, your variables. In this case, we're not going to group anything. And go click Next. You can choose what order they were presented in. So we're going to leave everything as default. Click Next. Choose a layout. Click Next. What styles you can do. You can choose different styles. Click Next. And finally, it's going to ask you to save. So we're just going to say here, interviewed. And click Finish. And you have a little document that you can print out and give to your PI or a colleague, and they can see right away all the patients who were interviewed had pain greater than 4, and they'll notice that, oh, okay, number 40 wasn't interviewed. So, finally,
Jack,
yes.
that means you didn't use the query in the query only ones that were interviewed. That's you had done that, but then
Yeah. So depending on how you set your criteria, it shows different data. So the first time I did it, I only wanted to see how many people who were interviewed. So that's why it only showed us all those who said yes. The second time, I wanted to see those who had pain greater than 4, and it shows this. And you'll notice that this one wouldn't have shown in the previous query when we asked about interviews because it wasn't checked. So clearly, this was either a mistake or maybe there's some kind of special reason. So you can change the criteria around, and so you can check for these kind of things.
You can put more than one.
Yes, you can also put more than one.
Interviewed plus pain over 4.
Yes.
anyone.
So Jack, just to repeat the question, you can have any unlimited number of criteria that you set to specify the data that you want retrieved.
Yes, you can set however many criteria that you want in order to get the data that you want to see. So we're going to close this out. So now you've seen kind of how to start building your database. You have your tables to store, you have the data, you have your queries to sort your data, you have your forms to enter your data, and you have your reports to kind of like show what the data that you sorted. So a couple of things I want to show you before I finish here. A lot of things one of the interesting things you can do with Access is create relationships among tables. So I'm not going to kind of go into it. It's a little technical, so if you want to know more about this, you can kind of learn on this on your own. But I'll show you quickly what it will look like if you were to set up a relationship. I'm going to go to Tables, and let's go back to our BPI table. Let's say you wanted to know who was the study ID. Was this person interviewed? And you'll see here if a relationship was set up, you can click on this and you'll see that, okay, this person, question 1 was age. So this person was over 25 and he was not interviewed. So this is like a one-to-one relationship. Basically, every person, every record has exactly one set of data. So you can set that up and then you'll see that every person has something like that. Let's close this out. So one other relationship you can set up is a one-to-many. So what is a one-to-many? Let's open up our interview table. So here we have all the study IDs, their age, and whether or not they've been interviewed. Now one-to-many, you can kind of like, so you can see that maybe you want to know all the prescriptions and what kind of drug they are taking. So one-to-many means that this one person has several data points that's related to them. So this person is taking 4 prescriptions, 2 of them are opiates, 2 of them are NSAIDs, and then maybe the second person doesn't have any, and so forth. And I think some later ons have one. So you can set a relationship among your tables to kind of get a better grasp of how these data are related.
Okay. Those prescription numbers, is that a separate table?
Yes.
That's not their own prescription number. That's a number of. You're just relating each person to one table.
Yes. So I can show you what that looks like. Let me just close this. I'm not going to save. And so you would have made a table of just prescriptions where it was just like, oh, this is every prescription that this study ID 1 was taken, every one that this patient was taking. And
They're particular to that patient.
yeah,
It's not just the drug, what the list of drugs.
yes, each of them is particular to this one, to each person. Okay, so we can close out that, and
You can have them in one table.
yes,
You don't have, like a lot of time we create one table has age, study ID, age, whatever medication, other, parameters. So
yeah,
you work on that table.
yes. So you can create one table that has all the data that's related to the second table. Okay, so I think that ends my tutorial.
Can I ask a question,
Yeah.
Jack, just to follow up with Dr. Etty's question? So if you had a bunch of different variables of interest, like prescriptions, age,
In one table.
in one table, what would be a better way to set it up? Would you set up a separate table for different categories of information, or would you put everything in one table?
You want to try to make as many tables. So you want to try to do a table for each category of data, so that this way it limits the amount of information that you have to enter in. Also, if you need to make a change, you don't have to change every single person. If everything was in one table, you have to find, let's say, you have to find every single time study ID number 1 was referenced. If you made a relationship, then if you close this out, then we could just change it here, and it would relate. So
It would relate to one form, to different tables, because the practicality here is to create a form, has all parameters, you enter the data, so it's easy to enter data, but it is, at the back there are different tables.
yes,
You create different tables for each, whatever, parameter you're looking for.
yes,
And integrate it into one form.
yes. You could. So basically, what she's saying that you could do one form and have every question kind of separated into a different table. You could do that. Generally, I just do one form for each table, because when we do analysis, we need to analyze each separate questionnaire by itself. So I would just do one form for all the BPI questions, one form for all of the demographics, and then if we needed to have a relationship, then we would make a relationship between the tables, and we could see the relationships in the tables. Okay. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Dhingra. Oh.
Well, thank you, Jack. That was really excellent. And in summary, we just want to review some important definitions that comprise the components of your Access database. This is all in your handout. And a table, as Jack mentioned, is where your data is located. A form is where you enter your data. It is called a form appropriately, as we mentioned, because it's just like any paper form that you may complete or fill out in real life. So the forms that our patients complete in a research study, we showed how you can actually emulate them and build them in Access and make them visually attractive for entering your data. A query is a filter. It lets you extract the data that you want from your increasingly large and growing database based on the instructions that you give it. You can save these commands for a query, rerun them at any time, and update your reports that are generated based on these queries that are put together in a nice, high-quality document that Jack showed you that can be very professional for sharing with colleagues and identifying particular areas that need to be addressed. Some additional considerations, we find it helpful. You should potentially keep this in mind as a rule of thumb. Enter as much data as you can in your database. It really will come in handy because if you need to add data later on, it tends to be a bit of a nuisance. So if you have it and it's there, it'll save you some steps in the long run. If you have the data on paper and you've collected it, enter it. Second, This really pertains to your naming conventions. Be consistent with how you name your variables, how you name your fields. Generally, you want your fields in your database to correspond to your questionnaire items. So you can have each field in your table map on directly to a particular item on a questionnaire. So set up your questionnaires appropriately ahead of time, before and as you're building your database. Be consistent with your naming conventions. In addition, you want to make sure that when you are entering your data, that you're very consistent in what you name particular responses even. So I'll give you an example. Suppose you have a question called country of origin, and the person is born in England, and one of your people doing data entry enters that in as Great Britain. Another one enters that in as United Kingdom. A third person or fourth person enters it in as UK. Another person just enters it in as Britain. So you can see you could have Great Britain counted as 6 different variables, which will be analyzed as 6 different variables. And this can really slow you down in your analysis. So the idea is here, be consistent with your field names as well as your responses. And do this up front, think about it up front, set this up front before you start entering your data. As Jack mentioned, it's important to really be conscientious about your questionnaires and how they're set up. So you want to note skip patterns, missed patterns, or refused responses in your actual forms. So everything is data, even missed data. You should account for times when a question is part of a skip pattern because, for example, you don't know whether it was unintentionally skipped or missed by a patient and hence left blank, or it's part of a skip pattern where it's not relevant. So you want to denote different responses for a skipped item, such as a 99, versus a response that may be left blank because someone erroneously missed it. So this is all important when you're setting up your forms and you're entering in your values, that you know what values to expect based on the questionnaire items. Finally, it's really important to break your data down into the most refined or granular pieces. This helps you do more refined sorting of your different categories of data later on. So for example, you have a patient's name. Instead of dumping the first and last name into one field or column, you can split this up into 2 columns, a first name and a last name. Why would this be important? Well, let's say you want to look at geographic region or addresses, and you can set up separate columns for city, state, zip code, and if you want to run a report of the number of patients who are from a certain area, such as zip code, you can do that very easily. So in summary, we hope that you'll agree that Access is very user-friendly. It's relatively simple to enter data. It can significantly lower your likelihood of user errors if you establish certain rules or restrictions, as Jack showed you. You can use Access as a complement to your favorite statistical program, such as Excel or SPSS or SAS. We use both SPSS and Access in tandem. We enter our data in Access and then we analyze it in Excel or SPSS or SAS. And the programs are compatible, so I can open up an Access form in Excel or SPSS. It's a very, very simple thing to do. In addition, we can use Access to generate reports and queries. You can pre-store the instructions for a query to find specific data and continuously rerun this information. And with the reports, you can display the values of interest in a professional manner using the document function that Jack reviewed earlier. So at this time, we just have a moment or two. If there's any questions at all, we'd be happy to answer those, and thank you very much for your attention.